Oh my gosh, Sir Francis Drake, the lights were off on Sir Francis Drake and about so many emergency
I
vehicles.
just want to keep them straight.
yeah.
That's all. Look, it's a glass.
I'm wondering if someone hit a power pole because there were
or-
PG&E trucks, ambulances,
Oh, whoa.
fire
Yikes.
trucks.
What a mess, because that place will,
Right in rush
that'll
hour.
back up for 400 miles on that street.
Yeah, but 399 was,
Yeah. You know that they're gonna close Highway 101 on is Sunday the 26th? On Sunday the 26th from 5 a.m. till 9 a.m.
101.
101.
Yeah, I saw that sign. I was like, the whole really?
Yeah, I think they may be moving some heavy equipment or something.
Oh my gosh, well, thanks for the warning.
Yeah, but if you're heading, no, both north and southbound.
What a mess.
Yeah, pretty radical. I
Life
don't
is
know,
getting
I've never seen that
I
before.
thought you wanted
This
to-
is, I told Deborah that I take one of these each night now,
Right,
and it really helps my back stiffness in the morning.
okay.
So it's
Almonds
called
are-
Aleve, and you can buy it in the pharmacy.
Oh yeah, it's over the counter, right?
It's naproxen, but it's better than ibuprofen.
What's the strength on it?
This is 220,
Oh,
but it's,
all right, no, I'll mention it to her.
yeah,
She,
I didn't know. if she-
certain, they're coated, right?
Uh,
Are they coated?
well,
I'm
oh,
just.
sorry.
Should say on the.
So
outside.
let's
Should say
we'll
on the
get going
outside.
here, but as last week, are there any issues, thoughts, clarifications that you'd like to make prior to moving to this next section, which was the beginning? No? Because what we ended up with last week was saying, we were talking about how to understand a murder mystery, read the last chapter.
Right,
And then you understand everything that went on before.
Right.
And you can kind of put it into context then, which was up to that point a mystery. So we read the end and said, this is what the consummation is. We went to the end of the book of Revelation to get it. And once again, that's often a useful thing to do in dream interpretation. Go to the end, try and get the end, see where it's kind of going, and then you might actually understand the beginning. But now, because of that, we move on page 9 in the book to the beginning. And once again, just interrupt me, if I'm not looking up, just interrupt me to make a clarification or a comment. To come into the image and likeness of God and dwell with Him in the new heaven and new earth may be the consummation of life, at least as far as Scripture and human knowledge can ascertain. What happens afterwards, when living in this new creation, God has not told us. What life is like once union with God is attained and life in a renewed creation progresses is obviously of little importance to us at this stage. This may be the end, but what of the beginning? What we find in John's vision is an explication of the end of a very long process known as salvation history. We will find when we encounter the vision of the opening of the 7 seals that what is being revealed is the end of God's plan for salvation, for the healing of creation, for the bringing about of a plan for union with creation through humankind. But that plan for salvation began long before, even at the very tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of the division into opposites. That's one of the things the knowledge of good and evil has first done, is it's taken something and divided it. And all of a sudden, that's when we say, from the very beginning came separation. You're dividing separate things right now.
And it seems like God knew from the beginning what was going to unfold.
Yes, yes. What had begun as a sort of infantile unity in the relationship between God and the original human being soon developed into a life of individuality and division. What had been a form of warm embrace now would be characterized by a relationship of perceived distance and paternal mentoring. Meaning, again, in that sense, right, up to this point we were in a unity, in a sense, walking with God. God and And Adam, God and Adam and Eve were together in the garden in a unity.
Yeah.
Then there'd be a casting out. So now there's this feeling of separation, but God's never separate, so he's mentoring us. This is what you need to do. All of a sudden, we're going to get instructions, laws, things of that
And in a
nature.
paternal way.
But it's paternal. What did that mean for you? And you just
That means a caring way.
okay, very good. Yes, yes. The human being now needed to believe that God had more wisdom than himself, and that obedience to that wisdom would lead him toward the path of healing. Faith and obedience became the hallmark of a relationship with God, especially obedience. The life of obedience would define religion and life through this early period of development, but it would never be the manner by which consummation would be obtained. St. Paul would describe this period of development using the image of a pupil and a mentor or a custodian. That's in Galatians, the 3rd chapter of Galatians. A concept with which John would have been acquainted. St. Paul would also tell us that a time would come when we would no longer need to rely on external obedience, but would need to take on a deeper form of responsibility to become mature and to fulfill our destiny.
Would that have come also for the Jewish people in their saga? That they would also have to come to maturity?
Yes. Well, this is the Jewish people, too,
Right.
in that sense. So, yes.
But it's not necessarily talking about Christ at this point.
No, this one's talking about the people, in a sense, at that point, when he says, that for a while we were underneath a custodian, but then you grow up and become the son. For a while the child, the son, is under the custodian in Galatians. That one's, if you want to take a look at it, is in Galatians.
It's
3:23. What?
3:24.
3:24. Wait, that's small
If I'm
print.
reading it right.
What's that?
If I'm reading your note right.
Is that right? Let's see if you read my note right. You wanna? Yeah, 3:24. Am I in chapter 3? Yes. That's why. I was reading through. In other words, the law was our monitor or custodian or teacher until Christ came to bring about our justification through faith.
Right.
So that was the idea. The law was our teacher. And but that's it. But now that faith is here, we are no longer in the monitor's charge. This is an interesting translation. Each one of you is a son of God because of your faith in Christ Jesus. All of you have been baptized into Christ, have clothed yourselves with him. Therefore, does not exist amongst you Jew or Greek, slave or free. So that sense of this translation called it monitor, often it's custodian, teacher, which was the idea. Everybody knew that boys would be given over to a teacher at a young age, and that would be their essentially their mentor.
Mm-hmm.
And then they grew up to be an adult, and the mentor was no longer needed. And that's what's coming about here. And so Paul's saying the mentor was the law at that point. And so once you've grown up, you don't need the law anymore. So we're really getting there too. Is that, as I said, I'm reading that again. St. Paul would tell us that a time would come when we would no longer need to rely on external obedience, told what we needed to do, but would need to take on a deeper form of responsibility, become mature, to fulfill our destiny, to actually live out of faith of the Spirit that's now we're clothed in. We need to know it. And this is seen in what we go on to next. Individual human development is a microcosm of just such a process. We observe the human infant as a unique individual, but in practical experience, it is apparent that the infant experiences a sort of unity with the parent and the perceived surrounding environment. Certainly, this is the empathic experience of a parent. It is one of the early parental disappointments when this empathic bonding begins to diminish as the child's ego identity develops. It is an empathic unity that is so attractive and strong that its loss has prompted many women to forget the difficulty of pregnancy and childbirth and once again desire another child. You know, and sometimes I think hard for men to understand.
Mhm.
It's like you were screaming, you were miserable, you spent 2 months just in misery, and then you had this childbirth that was painful. Let's do it again. What? You know, it's like, that there is obviously something so much more powerful than physical pain or discomfort here. That, otherwise, a woman would only do it once and say never again. Now, what we're getting at here is that idea of, we know this about, in children, that sense that a little baby actually kind of perceives in many ways the whole world as, you could say, its oyster. It's me. I'm it. And this is all me. And that separation is hard to grow out of. That's why many children, almost seem that they believe that they're omnipotent. It's one of the big problems for children when they've gone through two kind of dramatic things. When they go through either some sort of trauma or abuse, or parental divorce. And parents can take a 3, 4, 5-year-old, look them in the face and say, we just don't love each other anymore, but we still love you. And it's like, and the child will go, Daddy's leaving because of me. No, it's like that. Yeah, it's you basically can't convince them because they're already still saying, this, I am the world and I am powerful in this world, and so it's mine. And that type of sense of that, what's going on, that's kind of an infantile unity that we're in. That the minute you start to get an identity, all of a sudden leaves. So, children don't have that identity first because little babies are like, look at that thing up there, hardly even knowing it's them. It's like they're beginning to discover that there's something else around here that happens when I do. Wow, and then that's why it's so important, actually, in a way, for parents to disappoint children. Perfect parents create narcissists. That's the problem. We have a lot of people that try to be perfect parents. And perfect parents create a narcissist, meaning that child never learns disappointment.
Well, that's true. Like, if a kid is never ignored, they start to think that they're always supposed to be paid attention to.
There it is. And everything, and they're not supposed to have pain, and everything's supposed to go their way. It's one of the reasons that we have actually created a very self-centered, narcissistic culture when we started giving trophies to everybody. That sense. What happens when you make sure that everybody's self-esteem is so perfect and that they have no disappointments, now they're victims.
Or grade inflation in schools, which is
Yes.
rampant now.
Right, or even getting rid of them. I was just seeing the other day that they're, in the Independent Journal, they're talking about not having grades and stuff. But that sense is why? Because you disappoint, and that creates a narcissist, we know, because of these obvious reasons. You don't have disappointment. But that first disappointment is, the world is not all me. One of the things about a narcissist is, you are just an extension of me. And when you stop being an extension of me, you don't need to exist. You're only useful as an extension of me. Which goes to that basic baby thing, which is, Mom is an extension of me. And so that's when it is that a woman named Melanie Klein, back in like the 1950s, coined a term called the good breast and the bad breast. The good breast was the one that showed up when you cried. Meh, put it in my mouth. There it is. The bad breast doesn't show up when you cry. And that at least starts, at that point, you start to figure out there's a difference here between us. I am not you and you are not me. Because you're not doing everything I want. And that's why the parent that, has to disappoint, because, in that sense, actually helps create that separation with children.
Example, because I was just watching a TV program on dogs with puppies,
Ah,
and time after time, Mom would all of a sudden get tired of his feeding business, just get up and walk and
yes,
leave the babies. And,
yeah,
oh, what happened?
that's right.
I have better things to do right now.
Yes.
So that seems the natural way.
Well, it is. And as I say, but that early on, especially with the bonding with mothers and young infants, is as if they're in their own mystical world. And they are, in that sense. There is a unity that's going on. And that's even a lot of the research that shows these things, such as when a mother isn't able to do that, it causes great problems. Because they look at these things, and a little child might go, ooh, ah, ooh, and the parent goes, ooh, ah, ooh, where the child goes, you start mimicking each other. And it actually is a sense of unity. But if the child's going, and you go, ha, 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 it's so discontinuous that it actually creates problems in the sense of unity that happens in these
Well, it
senses.
seems like that sense of unity is important in the beginning. It has to be loosened up
Yeah.
later.
Well, that's it. So
In
we
development.
start immediately with that idea. Just in the first many months, as you start to get as a child in individuality. And as I say, that's why I say it's one of the parental disappointments, because there's a mystical world that gets lost there, and it's kind of like being thrown out of the garden on a metaphorical way. You're no longer in paradise for the parent or little child. There's disappointments going on. As the ego develops and individuality progresses, the naive child now needs to be given boundaries and directions to protect and guide him through the exigencies of life. It is as simple as realizing that without boundaries and guidance, the small child would see no problem with eating poisonous food and crossing the street without looking in both directions. There is not much survival value in freedom from obedience and laws. However, there comes a time when laws and obedience become constrictive to the process of living into personal identity. This is one of the places where we say there's not a survival. We need obedience to laws. We need that custodian. We needed the law. We need to be told things, which is right now when you give a small child, or even teenagers and all this, real freedom. They're not supposed to have it. It's like, oh, isn't that repressive? Isn't that awful? No, we see the outcome. If you say, what's the outcome of giving too much freedom and not enough law? Our present society is an answer to that. You see what it is. It is essentially a narcissistic society, which demands only its ways, which becomes completely divisive, and is a victim when you actually and you're not getting your own way, and wanting
And drug-addled.
There it is. It's got to be pleasure. Our society, like I say, is an example of not having boundaries and laws that really are supposed to be there.
We have a society, or at least a segment of it, that thinks that feeling euphoric is a normal way to be,
Yes.
and anything less is unacceptable.
Mm-hmm. So it's not very useful. So knowing that, though, going towards really speaking about now maturity, to get mature, not the small child will go, there comes a time when laws and obedience become constrictive to the process of living into personal identity. This will come about much later in life than a child. It is then that these must be cast off in order to progress. Such casting off and progression does not imply a rejection of what has been learned, though. It is not some modern adolescent rebellion. Rather, it is better seen as an incorporation of what has been learned, so that it might now be such a part of the person that he is now both a representative of such learning and free to move beyond its concrete restraints. Basically saying this is a true adult. No wise person, when they consider themselves mature and ready to take on personal responsibilities, would then find crossing the street without looking or eating poisonous food attractive possibilities. So it is that a time comes when, as we read in the letter to the Hebrews, it is time to move from childish milk to mature meat. This is the time that St. Paul describes as no longer living under the obedience of the law and now living the life of the Spirit. We see a parallel in the Song of Songs, when the watchmen, who at one time were of useful assistance to the maiden in locating her beloved, become a later time active impediments to the same. Now, that would take you needing to go and read the Song of Solomon, especially the 5th chapter. But what we're getting at in it is that if you read it in the first part, there's a part when, in the Song of Solomon, the beloved, God, has been obtained by the maiden, the Shulamite maiden. And she is now in her room, and he comes and knocks on the door and says, come out. And she goes, come in. He goes, no, come out with me. And she goes, no, I've oiled my feet and I'm ready for bed. Come on in. Come on, lover. And come in. It's almost like, if you're having a play, you go, hello? Where? She goes, the door opens, he's not there. Now she goes and searches for him. And as she's searching for him, then what she finds is the watchmen of the streets come, and they say, and she goes, where is my beloved? Where shall I find him? And they point her, he goes, over there, leaping on the hills and all. And so she goes and finds him. Now, that's early on. Later in this, we'll find the same sort of thing happen. And she will go out and look for them. And what do they do this time? They strip her naked and beat her. And so it's a kind of a sense, at which point we're kind of saying the authorities. The watchman at first is like the religious authority that's pointing you in the right direction. And so that's the boundaries you need. You need the directions. You need the law. You need this type of structure. But there will come a time when the structure will be repressive and it must be rejected. And that's the sense of this. When you, early on, need to be a part of a herd. But then otherwise you're just a wildebeest for the rest of your life rather than a human being. We all say we're unique. Well, then if we're unique, how can we always be part of a herd that just is just another zebra or just another wildebeest, in that sense. So early on, you need the structure, but there will come a time when that structure must be essentially rejected for a while, in a sense. And it's the structure of the herd, I say, when you don't have any personal identity whatsoever. Because you will have, as we just saw, with crossing the street or eating poisonous food, you will have already incorporated the law. You will have incorporated the people of God. You will have incorporated what it means to be a part of the church. And now you can, because you've got that secure foundation, now you can move on. That's the sense. It's not if somebody goes, well, I just totally reject it and that's it. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about people that become retired Catholics and stuff like that say, I'm never going to church again. It's the sense of that sense of going, I've incorporated this. Now with that I can move forward in life.
So that I have a foundation, I have stability, I can go on now.
Yes.
And explore.
I will go and find God in a different way now, where it's
Deeper
outside,
relationship.
where the religious authorities often say, get back in line. What are you doing? That sense. It's like St. John of the Cross, when they got really tired of him and they locked him in a closet for 9 months. Of course he wrote, some of his greatest poetry while in that closet. But it was the idea of get back in line.
How presumptuous.
And so, rather than I'm having this relationship with God, or Padre Pio, the same thing. Mm-hmm. When the bishops come in and say, you can't do it your own way. He's sitting there staring at the Eucharist. There's a picture of him up there above the bookshelf doing this thing, which is, as he's looking at the chalice and looking at this, and he could be there 20 minutes because he saw Jesus. And they're going, Mass can't be that long. Get it together. Be obedient. And so they actually stopped him from saying public services, public Mass, because they were trying to get him. They were stripping him, beating him, naked, as he is actually in his own way. That sense, living with God. So that's what we're getting at. During individual development, this is a natural process. The sense of we'll just go through these stages. There comes a time when each person finds that they must strike out to find their own destiny. Mythologically, this is seen as the hero's journey. It is the time when to merely mouth what has been learned, to merely think as one's parents have thought, to be just a part of the family or of the society is oppressive. The time has come to be an individual. In inner terms, the hero's journey is a time when the ego is being developed and strengthened. But once this has occurred, it is time for the ego to submit itself to the greater demand of allowing the full self to come forth, that the image of God may conform to the likeness of God. It is a path that only can occur with great awareness and humility. Such awareness and humility lend themselves to suffering. Therefore, many fight this move, a move often described as the midlife crisis. To fight this move is not merely to reject development and maintain a seemingly happy but undeveloped life. To reject the move is met with depression. The choice then is between rejecting life and entering depression, or accepting the move toward destiny and encountering true suffering.
Suffering of what sort? Any sort, or just that of being uncertain and
Well,
searching for God but still not finding Him yet?
yes, and also not having your own way.
Okay.
That's that sense. Because
And
we're
possibly
actually,
disappointing other people.
yes, being rejected, not having your pleasures met, that sense. That's often the idea. It's that place that actually where humility sometimes feels like humiliation, but it's really humility. Humility is suffering, because it's saying, not my way, not my wants. And so, a lot of times things, will feel like suffering, and the feelings that come from that, that are, a part of this. Because remember, what we've just been saying is, let me get white. There we go. If we had ourselves here again, and that's our full self, what we've been kind of describing in human development, and again, as our microcosm of the big stuff, we're staying with the individual at the moment, we kind of start in this blob, if you will. That's us. We kind of come into this world like that. And then we start to develop a kind of an unstable identity. And so I'm not sure I'm the blob or I'm this, type of thing. And we also, in that unstable identity, we have parents usually and others out here, I'll be sexist here and put a dress on this one. But it's like we have our parents out here, and in order to get stability, we learn a lot from them. They're the ones giving us our boundaries. Other people are doing it too. We get the religious authorities giving our boundaries, and after a while, we become more and more of a sense of self until we finally say, I don't have to just mouth what you're saying. I'm not just you. I'm now my own person. And so all of a sudden, this influence kind of wanes then. It doesn't want to wane. Okay. Yes, but it doesn't want to wane.
Just
Okay.
swiggle through it.
What's that?
Swiggle through it.
Yeah. No, well, okay. But yes, I can do that. But that's, and now this is my identity, but still now this is just the I, that identity, the ego, Latin and Greek. So that's just the I. And I identify with this. This is who I think I am. Now that work, if we really look at this work takes about the first half of life, we'd say. Maybe 35, 40 years of life to develop such a strong identity. This is me. Now I found myself, and I become, whatever you say, you found your identity. What is suffering? Suffering now is saying, something, and now you have to relinquish that for the greater whole, rather than hold on to it. This is the idea of once I found it, Those who will save their lives and hold on to themselves will lose the fullness of life, and those who will relinquish will find true life. But to relinquish it might be, I've built up all of this, and now it's time to give it up. I am the master of my own life. Now I have to make really God the master of my life. I don't get to do it all myself. That's suffering, and that's when you're told these types of things.
I can see how that would be suffering, but I don't think it's all suffering.
Well,
I think God is a companion, and the eventual goal is enhancing.
but then this is like, this is why we always go back to the easiest thing that God uses, which is this: money. People won't give up their money. That's suffering. To tell somebody to tithe is suffering. Or as I say, tithing is an Old Testament idea. It was a training ground, a custodian. Jesus said, give it all to me. I want 100%. And so it's suffering. That's why I say I think God uses money as the most obvious thing, because it's the hardest thing for us to give up. And so it's really saying, but for me to give that up, because what am I doing? I'm also giving up my own self-dependent security. That's why people don't do it. Wait a minute, I might not be secure. You're right, you might not be. Well, I'm in control of my own life. Now, if we really did it, you go, I'm suffering because I have uncertainty now. That's suffering. Mm-hmm. That's the suffering we're talking about, that type of idea. Now, that's a most basic one. That's why I think, like God will say, I don't need your money. I don't need you. I got the cows of 1,000 hills. I got, what do I need that for? It's a training ground for us. And we suffer. And it's like, and you watch everybody do it. Everybody squirms on that one. Why do you squirm? It should feel good. I'm totally with you now, God. I am totally yours, and you're totally mine, and I totally rely on you. And aren't we going to have a fun time? No, I'm not. And so then we take it to more subtle places, of these other things, that may show up that God says, I want you to do. Most people are, often say, I will never give God totally my life because he might send me to Africa, and I might be in the Congo, but no, I'll give you everything, but don't send me to Africa. Why not? Send me wherever you want, We're together, because that will be suffering. Yeah, maybe it will. Or suffering might be not getting to go. I know people that want to be missionaries, and it's like, no. Why? Because that's not your call, in that sense. So that's what we mean by the relinquishing of an identity that I've built up. And so, when I say about money, it's that final thing that we go, this is my self-control. I'm in control of my life. And the real process is to give it totally up. And that's like, wow. And each time, and we meet each suffering about what that means. Now, how we do that, that's a simple statement. That's what we're getting into with all of this. The process of that relinquishing goes on. That's part of the maturity. The first part is build an ego, or else you're psychotic. As I've said, that's the sense. All these people that don't have things floating around, sharks and things. What happened? Or it's what our bad dreams are made of. Boogeymen are out there. Things we're scared of are unconscious. And if we can't have a solid sense of identity, I don't know that's the voice within. Like, when I say boogeyman would be like this. Do you have a persecuting voice in your head ever? Telling you just messed up and you're just really bad? Well, that's not you. Because it's a voice talking to you, isn't it? Because it's using the word you. Look what you did again. You did it again. You messed up again. You're never going to get it right. Why did you say, I did it? That's it. Both. It's like, God, I can't believe it. I do it again. Yes, you did it again. Look at you. And that's, like I say, if you listen, it's like a you language. Who's speaking to whom? Some other content is speaking to the ego. And if it hasn't grown up, we're always going to, and gotten stronger, then it invades and takes over. And that's kind of what happens when we say people are psychotic. Those inner voices are thought of as outer voices, because they haven't really gotten that idea. Oh yeah, that's my own persecuting voice. No, they hear it out there. See, it said it again. It's after me. And you see the person walking the street. No, it isn't. No, I won't. You know, they're screaming at something, but it's really because their ego didn't get, either didn't get formed well enough or got actually destroyed by drugs.
Or it could be your parents that have been telling you that message,
Yes.
and it comes back when something comes up, right?
Right. And that would be your, let's say it was, you had a dad that was always telling you. So now dad's inside. It's not the real dad. Because dad's not there saying it to you. So it's your own memory
Right.
of dad.
Right.
And he's the one that's doing it to
Right.
you.
Right.
But you could actually think of it, if it wasn't your dad, it was like something else. That's why people like to say, if we actually go, your dad, they wouldn't have, psychotic people practically don't think this way, but they think things like, I have the image of God within me, so then they think they're God, because that pull.
Mm-hmm.
I am Jesus Christ. Okay, well, you're in the insane asylum, so, there's a lot of Christs in the asylum, in that type of idea.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what it would say, it has to become strong. And now it can go, oh, that's my inner dad. There's dad's voice. I know it's dad out here, not, I'm being haunted. Dad follows me around everywhere I go. That's psychosis. Versus I hear his voice saying, you're never going to make anything of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That sense. And then you go, okay, that's an inner voice, at least, that's saying that to me.
Right.
And I know it.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you're not psychotic. Because you have a strong enough sense of identity that you can know the inner voices and the outer ones.
Mm-hmm.
But now, we'd say when it got strong enough, you're now maturing to the point of having that strength. Now true maturity comes in, which is now you start to submit that identity to the deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we say the suffering really starts. Because, who knows what it's going to be, like we just were describing. But it has to come. We look at this on the bottom of page 11. Dante Alighieri, the successful poet and well-respected 13th century Florentine politician, tells us of his midlife crisis that compelled him to take the journey to wholeness. He begins his great work, The Divine Comedy, with the words, midway through the journey of life, followed by an excursion into hell, entered through an arch inscribed with the proclamation, abandon all hope, you who enter here. That's what we mean by, that's the reality of suffering that comes in. When you start this journey, you have to encounter first the darkness. You have to kind of go through the sense of, this could be hopeless. This is, a wild time I'm about to enter into. That's why most people don't do it. They don't want the pain. And so they stay in a comfortable spirituality. But the spirituality is not comfortable. That's just like it's not an easy end to creation, to the new creation. We all look at this, the book of Revelation, and we go, whoa, what a mess. And we're saying, yes, internally and externally, there's a lot of chaos and suffering that seems to go on this journey to completion.
Yeah.
And so, yes. And so that's why, but it starts with, abandon hope, you who enter here. Now, of course, we're not hopeless. We know the end of the story. Even if you turn to the end of the pages of Dante's Divine Comedy, you get the beatific vision and you're up on paradise, the Mount Paradise. So you get there. It's just going to be a journey at first. It might not be fun. Were you going to say something, Steve? Or something?
I was just thinking something.
Okay.
And
Well,
trying to. So I don't know. Not yet.
blurt it out when you're
Okay.
ready.
I will.
This pattern is likewise observed in a literary precursor to Dante's work, the Voyage of St. Brendan the Navigator. In this work, we find St. Brendan living an ordered life in the middle of Ireland when a journeyer arrives to tell of finding the fabled Isle of the Saints. St. Brendan is then given a vision of a fulfilled life, of a touching of paradise, which so grasps him that he abandons his ordered life in favor of the rigors of the sea and a small boat. Leaving that comfortable spiritual life in the monastery, now he heads out. Whether it is John's vision from Jesus, Dante's travels in the Divine Comedy, or Brendan's journey, the message is the same. Suffering and trials lie before the one who submits themselves to the finding in paradise, the beatific vision of the consummation in the divine marriage. So if anybody tells you it's easy, realize they don't know what they're talking about. So,
Oh, good.
yes. If the book of Revelation is, as I propose, a description of such a process, then it also likely follows the pattern that has been observed over the last 2 millennia of the process of spiritual development. We have seen in the literature of Christian mysticism that we can encapsulate the spiritual development of the individual into 3 categories: the purgative way, the illuminative way, and the unitive way. You've heard this from me before if you've been beaten over the head by the other things I've done. So these won't be strangers to you. But it's purgative, just like in the idea of purgatory, illuminative, and unitive. Others have called these the way of beginners, that's the purgative, the way of proficients, and the way of the perfect. Whatever the term, the experience of life is similar, and the tasks the same, with development focused upon the final accomplishment of a unity of the individual with God. It is reasonable that John, being known as the mystical disciple, would likely have such a revelation, especially if it was also introducing something new to him and the world. And this is an important point. Dreams and visions seldom occur that do not add to a person's knowledge and experience. That's again why if you have a dream or a vision, you go, oh, I know what that means immediately.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's not something new. It's too limited an interpretation. It's too simple. It really is. What am I supposed to be getting from this? Is almost always the question. What would be added here is that this developmental process is not merely for the individual, but for all of creation. The individual here is truly acting as a microcosm of a macrocosmic action. The development of the creation towards its own glorification in God. It is a new, glorified creation that we see at the end of the book of Revelation that John gets. Unfortunately, the book of Revelation does not easily present itself in such a nice threefold structure, leading to culmination. But we will see it that way as we go through. We're going to actually see that starting with the seals and the trumpets, we're kind of going through the purgative way of really dealing with a lot of stuff that has to be dealt with. Now, purgative way is often you'll be dealing with your darkness. In Dante, it would be going through hell and realizing all of these things that you want to avoid in yourself, but need to be purged, you know. And that would be like, you know, you could just put down the vices and stuff like that, but it's also more subtle. But that's the purgative way. And the beginning is these things we'll see under the seals and the trumpets, much of what has to be purged in this world and in ourselves. As we move to the illuminative way, which shows up really somewhere around chapter 12, when we all of a sudden find that there's a new life coming out. What happens? The woman clothed with the sun gives birth. And we'll get into the depths of that when we get there. But that's as if a new life has shown up at that moment. We've moved between ways. We're no longer having to purge ourselves. Now we're actually, on a sense, moving towards a fullness with God, to a union. But it's not there yet. Now we have a different battle from dealing with our own vices that we'll see, to a battle with really the devil. Because what happens in chapter 12 and 13 is all of a sudden we've got a new birth. A woman clothed his son gives birth to a child, and then is chased by the dragon. And so, and also we've had the war in heaven happen and all this stuff. And now by about 13, and then we're going to get into the Antichrist and all this other stuff we're dealing with at that point. But it's a different part of the spiritual life than just trying to become a better person and get rid of your vices. You know, now we're into a different part of the spiritual life when you move beyond. Okay, you may have gotten by your vices, but you're not ended. Now you would be said to be in the illuminative way, moving towards more and more enlightenment about who God is and having God in your life, until you finally, at the end, come to the unitive. And wow, what do we mean by unitive? Just think, we go back to the culmination, which is the unitive way ends in union. The union is clear from once again the culmination. I'm in a New Jerusalem where God is the light of it everywhere. The sun is not the sun and the moon anymore. God is the light. God is there at all places, covering you. That would be called in the ancient language the uncreated light of God now surrounds you and permeates you. You're permeated by it with the Holy Spirit, who is God. And you're also surrounded by it now in a new creation. So now union has taken place. There is no separation between you and God. You're an individual, but you're not, you know, where is God today? You know, no. There's that separation's overcome. So we move between these places, from purgative to illuminative, from illuminative to unitive.
Can you give an example of someone, a Christian, that may have achieved that prior to death? Is there someone that...
Yeah, and yes, and later we'll get into it. I use Padre Pio as an example, because he's one that you know, that, I mean, here it is. I mean, by the time he's doing all this stuff as a young child and things, but then he gets to a place in his life where it's like he's in that illuminative place where he's talking with Jesus all the time. You know, there's that time when you know, his father is asking him to pray for him. He goes, I can't. Jesus said I can, you know, ask for prayers for everybody else, but not my own family, not myself. That was part of the humility, that I can't pray for my own family and self and stuff. Somebody else has to pray for you. And his dad goes, you've healed so many people. It's like, well, no, it's me talking to Jesus, and Jesus said he'll do it. Or Padre Pio is bilocating. You know, that time when they said, you know, he was in Italy at one point, but he was in Milwaukee at the same time. And things of this nature. What's that?
In Milwaukee.
Well, yeah. It was the ordination of a priest friend of his that was being ordained, so he showed up for it. And then these other two got into arguments supposedly about it, saying, no, I saw him. He was in Italy. No, he was there. They went, were you? Yeah. How do you do it? I don't know. But I was there. You know, that sense. We go, but he's not yet united with God, because he still has his doubts. He's still dealing with doubts and things like that. And then that's where we get into the end of this book. You know, we get into the place where he has to finally contend with despair and death, the final enemy. And then we'd say he's at the end of the illuminative way. The complete union, I don't think we actually make that at this point. That complete union we get is the New Jerusalem. Because we're even in that separation state at our death until the last judgment and the resurrection of the body. That's the idea of the whole idea of that comes at the end of the book of Revelation. That we're separate, so we're not ever completely in union. Because until the last judgment, when union is brought together with us, our bodies and our souls, spirits are reunited, we're judged, and then in that place of union, you know, of uniting ourselves, we go into the New Jerusalem, where God is all in all to us, and we're united with him. So that's as close, you know, that's a close one. That's clear to us, since he only died in 1968. We can use him because it's not a lot of mythology has been built up around him yet. You go back to some of the older saints and people; they get mythologies built up around them. You know, even our good old Protestant saints, so Reese Howells and things like that. You get these things like they're almost musicians or
Right.
and stuff. So. So it's not a nice threefold structure that we're going to see, but we'll kind of see it anyhow. Rather, the book of Revelation is comprised of a series of 8 visions. And that's an important thing. What do you think about the number 8?
Turn it sideways was like infinity.
It's in. Okay, there we go.
What did you say? What did you say?
He said, "Turn it sideways, and it's infinity."
Oh.
Yes. Yeah, it is. But they didn't have that back in the Greek
Yeah.
and Roman, so that's so it's a nice thing. But do you know what the number 8 stands for?
Is it something new? Because 7 days was,
You're onto it.
but 7 was the rest and the end, right? So 8 would be a beginning.
It's a new beginning.
Mm-hmm.
8 is the number of new beginnings.
Mm.
You look on the count up the names. It's like Jesus Christ in the Greek.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus Christus. When you do that and you count all the letters, because remember that's how Greek and Hebrew counted. Our numbers are Arabic, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and things like that. The ways the Greeks and the Hebrews all did it in the Bible is each letter. So alpha, beta, gamma. Actually gamma. That's obviously gamma. But anyhow, you know what I'm trying to do. I'm upside down. That's my problem. There we go. So, but these are like 1, 2, 3, and it goes along like that. In the Roman alphabet, it's the same thing. In that sense. And so now you count along the letters. We'll get to this with the Antichrist for sure. So Jesus Christ, taken in the Greek and all that, comes out to 888.
Mm.
Yahweh, in some ways, I forgot the whole thing. I think it's Yahweh Elohim, but I'd have to look this up as 777
Mm.
when the numbers come out.
Mm.
And so we see this as fullness, new creation. Jesus is the new creation. And then,
What does Lucifer come out as?
666.
Oh, he does. Oh, okay.
Well, no, I mean, with that,
Can you see that
yes.
process?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
In that sense, if you ask that, I don't know.
Oh,
If we
okay.
had to say Lucifer itself, but
Just curious.
that would be. I've never counted it up.
Oh,
So
okay.
somebody, in the
It ain't
Hebrew.
worth it.
If anything significant comes from it, let me know. I
That's-
want to know.
Okay, yes.
But yeah, I guess they didn't have that same concept of devil as, did they in the Hebrew? Or?
Yes and no. It developed.
Oh, okay.
It developed. Yeah, early on, the concept of the devil early on was that God was kind of both.
Yeah.
I bring woe and I bring, that's Isaiah even says it that. In this sense of, that Saul, an evil spirit of Yahweh came upon Saul and he went crazy.
Mm.
And so, but then the concept developed more and more to that of our what we have as Satan,
Mm.
and the like. So, yeah, because the whole concept we'll get into that, and probably as we discuss more about evil, is evil outside of God? Well, if evil is outside of God, then God's not God. Because, or the way somebody, well, then evil doesn't truly exist. Because if it existed inside of God, then God is evil. So you get the people that will say evil and in the reality doesn't truly exist. And so you get into huge philosophical things here that St. Augustine and all were saying basically it's not real in the sense of existence, because only God made only things good and nobody made anything other than God did. So either God created evil or evil doesn't exist. Or evil is, Steve's going, whoa. And that's the arguments.
It sounds like another book.
Yeah, that's right. Which has always been called the theodicy question.
Mm.
And theodicy is, how does evil exist with a good God? And Gnostics and dualists say there are two gods. There's Jesus and Satan. And so but the early church went, no. That was what was defeated at the Council of Nicaea, and we got the Nicene Creed in the New Testament from, which was that, no, it's not two gods. There is only one God.
Mm.
And that's where, on a simple level, we might actually say, what is evil then, but separation?
Mm.
You know, then it doesn't exist in its own reality. It exists in a diminishing of the good. They'll say, now this is where you get. They say you're right. There are books upon books. There was the arguments against Augustine and all of this, and
How do they come to the conclusion when Jesus is casting out demons out of people in the Gospels?
yeah.
What is that? That if evil doesn't exist, why was he casting
Well,
out
it's in that sense, but that the evil then is not its own reality, but it is a reality of perversion of the good. So Satan was good. Satan was like the cherubim,
Right.
and falls from the cherubim. So Satan's created good, but perverts the goodness by lessening himself, by separating himself from God. That's
No, I hear that.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with that theology, I guess. I mean, I thought it was pretty clear that, you know, we do not fight against flesh and blood, but against evil and wickedness and...
yeah. It doesn't say evil, just wickedness and spirits and iniquities in high places. What is evil? You know, that's kind of a concept we need to have, but it's that's the sense of what is that evil, and so we're really saying it is a fallen spirit. And what is the fall? The separation. And that's the idea. The name Michael, we'll get to him, the 12th chapter, when Michael shows up. But then Michael means who is like God. So in the story, it's like that idea, the story of the fall of Satan is that here's one of the cherubim, and he sees what's going to happen. That God is saying, I'm going to get my humans back by becoming one of them. And he's going, those creatures, you're going to become one of those creatures? No, your glory cannot be so defiled by those little mud things that you made out of mud. And that's disagreeing with God. At which point, Satan falls. That's the sense, because you're not going along with the program. And from the lower echelons, because you get early on in the church, you get the echelons of angels. The lowest not so much in like moral lowness, but in closeness to us. There's kind of like the idea, if you think as close to God as you can get, it's close to humans. Humans have the angels. And above the angels are the archangels. And above them, you start moving through a series to the point of dominions, thrones, powers, principalities, these things. Then you get up to the highest, which are the seraphim and the cherubim, which are at the throne of God. For God is enthroned upon the cherubim, and the seraphim serve him. That's what Ezekiel and all that see. So they're around the throne. So we say the cherubim and the seraphim are the highest. They're the closest to God. The angels are the closest to us. Michael's an archangel, dealing with us most of the time. So we go so it's said, and there at the highest is the chief of the seraphim, Lucifer, now rebelling by saying no. And you hear a voice crying through the heavens from the lower echelons, and Michael flying through with his sword out, going, who is like to God? Michael. Because all angels' names end with El, which is Elohim. That's the El part. So that's it. So it's Mika.
Sounds like the angels, all of them were given free will as well.
They were, to make their choice. And when we speak of angels, we're going to be saying that being spirits, without bodies, their choice is eternal. We live in a transitory, which is lucky for us, we live in a kind of a transitory world where change is possible. So you can change up to that point. That's the sense of that. And so, but the angels couldn't change their minds. They are a mind. Now we're getting into deep angelology here. But we'll get into that because it's important, because we deal with a lot of angels in this book. Now, what is an angel and stuff? But that's the sense of God created Satan or Lucifer good. Satan just means adversary in the Hebrew. So he got named the Satan, you know, but it wasn't his proper name. It was the cherubim, probably Lucifer, we say, from different places. We have to remember a lot of, as we go through this, about angels and stuff, a lot of our stuff about angels and God and all that came from Milton's Paradise Lost, which is a novel. It's not biblical. So it's even, you know, the idea of these things. You know, Dante's Divine Comedy is much closer to the Bible. That's why it was often said. Milton isn't. And so, you know, so a lot about the Paradise Lost and all the angels and what's going on we have to realize. So with that little side excursion, we'll go back to 8, which says that this book is about going to be, you know, symbology now. And this, again, goes with our speaking of dreams. Numbers in dreams are exceptionally important because these, you know, our dreams and our souls know these things. You know, these numbers are not arbitrary. Nobody sat back, you know, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago where let's make this number mean this. You know, they're there, they're inherent in us that we know it. And so we're going to say, yeah, if I dreamt of 8, I'm probably dreaming, you know, all of a sudden there's 8 puppies running around. There's something new coming around. 6 puppies, maybe something bad, you know, coming around in the puppy world or the new animalistic primitive world. You know, dream of dogs, and you're often dreaming of instincts and stuff of that nature. So, you know, so you'd actually be able to do your dreams that way, like we're going to do the book of Revelation. But it's set out for us as a story, therefore, that's saying this is new creation. I'll keep going with this right now. The 8 comprise a literary structure, like any good dream, of an introduction and conclusion, that's 1 and 8, if you will, sandwiching 6 sets of visions, made up of 7 events each. 7, as we just said, completion. Each one is a complete series. The introduction, revisited in chapters 4 and 5, is followed by a vision of letters delivered to the churches, seals being opened, trumpets blown, then 7 unnumbered visions, giving way to bowls poured out, and finally another set of unnumbered visions. This might seem confusing if it were not for the fact that each set appears to end up in the same place, a heavenly scene. Then each heavenly scene seems to lead to the next set of events, which in many circumstances appears very similar to the earlier circumstances. It might be confusing if we were not to view this as a developmental process. It's kind of like, why are we going back to this stuff? It's almost as if you're seeing it that way. Now, we only have about another page and a half to go, but do you need a break, as it is? Or do you want to just finish?
Finish.
Anybody need a break? No, okay. Okay. I mean, yeah, so. We know from observing child and adult development that we all tend to flow through the stages of life that appear to recapitulate earlier stages. Adolescence has been called a recapitulation of the terrible twos. We just repeat so much of the stuff. Even if adolescence is seen as a rather recent experience in human society, prior to this a person merely left childhood and became an adult, the experience of recapitulating the 2-year-old's primary narcissism in adolescence is an instinctual urge to move towards independence. Actually, that's an interesting thing about our society you can think of, which is that what we call adolescent, you know, normally would have been a person going off into their adult life. And now we don't have them have an adult life yet for various, you know, complicated
Well,
reasons.
they would have gone into an adult life to adult work,
Right.
whereas we extended that workless period.
And so we wonder why these, you know, this narcissism was important at 2 years old, because you had to become yourself. That was like we talked about last week, where it's like, now I can withhold my poop, and I can go I have power. I'm me. You know, I have some control. And the same thing comes up in adolescence, but since we've extended it, what would have been, okay, go to work, get married. You know, that sense. As we say, you know, Mary was, you know, probably, you know, a young teenager, a young woman, 14, 15, maybe, you know, 16 at most. You know, that type of thing. People were married at that young age, or they were in the workforce, in that sense. So you needed that independence at that time. But so now we see that, but that what was happening at 2 to become an identity now is becoming, moving towards adulthood, and your own identity as an adult. The small child is practicing their independence, much to the dismay of the parent, a practice that is to give way to true independence in adulthood. These stages, when completed, often have a sense of accomplishment soon erased as the next stage is entered. Ask the 8th grader who briefly feels superior to the classmates in earlier grades, only to enter high school as a freshman and experience starting all over. The same holds true for the high school senior who becomes a freshman in college, or the college senior entering the workforce. Accomplishment and rest soon give way to a renewed journey. We see that life is made up not so much of a straight line, but of an oscillation, a sense of going forward only to seemingly go back. But the going back is truly still a going forward. It's much more like climbing a mountain in a spiral fashion. You end up in the same place many times, only higher up. So if you really think of an oscillation, as we're saying this, you know, it might seem like I'm oscillating, going back and forth, back and forth. So all of a sudden, I've gotten, you know, the beginning of the seals, and now I get to the point, I get here, and all of a sudden, at the end, we're going to find is a Sabbath. But just as I get to the Sabbath, I go back up one, only to, you know, in the trumpets, only to come back down to another Sabbath. Well, that's an oscillation. But if you were to draw a mountain in here, whoa, go away. If you were to draw a mountain in there, all of a sudden you'd see it's a spiral path going up the mountain. And that we end up higher up. So if the 2-year-old might be right around here with their narcissism, then we go, but then we grow up and we come to some accomplishment and feel I'm there, only to start up again, and now I'm an adolescent, throwing out my independence, going up again. And this is what we're going to want to use as a pattern to understand what's going on in the seals, the trumpets, and the like. That we're going to see that we've actually, looks like we're in the same thing, dealing with the same thing, but in a different way, in a more mature fashion. We do not always like this fact about climbing the mountain. We do not always like this fact. The small child enjoys growing older, of seeing himself higher up the mountain, but the older adult often has lost this appreciation. The common midlife crisis is just such an experience. If that midlife adult could find the child's appreciation for progress, the crisis would be averted. However, many develop a spiritual acrophobia and wish to descend. This is probably due to the belief that the top of the mountain is merely a jumping off point into the deadly oblivion of non-existence, a belief negated by the disclosure at the end of John's vision. Once I get up here, it's just suicide. There's nothing there. Bye-bye. You know. And frankly, somewhere inside each one of us, we believe that to some degree. Otherwise, we'd have certainty versus faith. Remember, faith, the opposite of faith is certainty, not doubt. Doubt and faith have to go together. If you don't have doubt, you can't make the choice. So you doubt, well, it could be oblivion, but God tells me it's not. And God tells me it's not, and I believe in God, which I don't know if God exists, but I think He does. And so faith is, I'm going to believe God exists, and I'm going to believe what He says, even though
even though I've seen dead bodies and it doesn't look good.
Right. And people tell me it's not rational. That's right. That's it. Exactly. You got it. So that's when we go, wait a minute, how are you so certain? And the answer is, I'm not certain. I have faith. That's where they have to have faith. Once you're certain, it's over. There is no faith when certainty is there. That's why Paul says in 1 Corinthians 12:13, all faith and all this passes away. Love won't. That union with God, love, and with each other won't pass away. But faith passes away. Because faith is not needed when you have the certainty of the new creation. But we don't have that certainty right now. And so we all have a bit of a doubt. And with doubt you go, well, I could believe or I could not believe. Feels better to believe. I think I'm going to go with belief. Because it feels rather depressing not to. Which is often a good discernment. When something feels deadly, don't go with it. That's the Deuteronomy. I put before you life and death. Choose life. Why would you choose death? And misery. And likewise, it was saying here, if this is our midlife journey up there, midlife crisis is, I liked it being down here better. I think I'll descend. That's the sense. Rather than, as I say, get the appreciation of the child who wants to grow older. This is an adventure. I wonder what's happening next. Even that's the way to deal with death. 90 years old. Wow, it's coming. I wonder what it's going to be like. Now, that's a little bit of a fantasy. But still, if you could grab some of that, you're going to be better off. With this understanding of human development applied to the progression within John's vision, we may get a better understanding of the process of development that creation is to follow as it moves toward glorification. Again, that's important. This is what this is setting up. With this understanding of human development, which is a microcosm of the macrocosm, applied to the progression within John's vision, we may get a better understanding of the process of development that creation is to follow as it moves toward glorification. And likewise, which we as individuals are to experience as we progress in the same manner. Our individual spiritual lives, again, are going to be mirrors of the overall one of history. We may now be able to understand what we encounter in John's vision. He envisions a process by which God will bring creation and the individual to a transformed life, united to God's own life. It is a corporate vision and an individual dream. Its goal is transformation and new life. With the book of Revelation, we find ourselves beginning in the middle, much as we do with Dante in the Divine Comedy. We find ourselves at the edge of life where maturity demands a new risk, where the now established adult ego must submit itself to the process of realizing that it is not the all in all, but only a part of the whole person. We find ourselves with Dante entering our own dark wood, finding our own gate inscribed, abandon all hope, you enter here. We begin our journey to wholeness. At the outset, we are reminded of what the ego was to have incorporated prior to embarking on the journey into the depths of the self and the spirit. We are reminded of the virtues and attitudes necessary for the journey to be successfully traversed. Reminded of the requisite virtues and attitudes outlined in the letters to the 7 churches. That brings us to the end of that first chapter, which moves us into the letters to the churches as we look at them. But as that last part we just read and said there is saying to us, what are they? What are we going to find in them? They actually lay out the behaviors, attitudes, and ways of being that we need to have if we're going to be safely moving and being able to move forward. If we don't have the teachings and the boundaries put forth, then we're going to find ourselves in a very, very dangerous place. And so the necessity of these virtues being acquired, that we're going to go through the churches and say, look, in each one of the churches there is pretty much, except for one of the churches, when it only has one of these things, there's a commendation and a condemnation.
Mm-hmm.
I commend you for this, and I condemn you for that.
Mm-hmm.
And the commendations are, keep doing this. This is what you need for your own identity and what you need to have to move forward. And the condemnation is, this is what you're missing. Work on it. And now when you've got these things, then we're going to be able to enter the trapdoor in heaven and move into the deeper spiritual life. And it's also, therefore, likewise, I mean, we're saying this about ourselves, as our spiritual life. If we project this into the world, we say, you know, for this world to come through safely, it's why we actually promote the virtues. And we cannot allow this free-for-all amongst people, or else it falls apart into the hands of the dragon that's chasing us all, in that sense. So how can you be safe? How can you get through and climb this mountain? It's the ways of the virtues and the attitudes and behaviors that is going to be put forth to the 7 churches, 7 being a representative now of the whole body of Christ, the whole church.
So some on an individual level, and then on the corporate level with the 7 churches, when we're developing the virtues and attitudes, is that the purgative way? Is that somewhere in between the purgative way and the illuminative way?
It's actually what we're gonna. It's prior to the purgative. It's kind of like the introduction. Before we even can actually take on the purgative way, we need to have these as our guides, because we're going to meet things like, you know, using Dante as an example. Before you descend into hell and move to the first levels of hell, and meet some things that are really kind of miserable, you know, you need to have prepared. It's almost like your armor. And that would be, like Paul would say, the armor of Christ, you know, the full armor. Put on these things, and with them you will be able to encounter the darkness in the world and in your own soul. Because as I said in other ways, you know, that if we're talking about, as I said, if the ego is like the minnow inside the self, there's whales in there and big sharks. And so how do you take them on safely and encounter them and deal with them? You've got your virtues, you've got your behaviors that are there for you. So that's why so it's essentially, and I'm saying this because the first thing you do is these letters. Then we go into encounter. Then we move into the heavenly, and the first seal is opened. You know, before it's like moving deeper and deeper into the process. But the letters come first. Which, when it comes to the Book of Revelation, is the boring thing for most people. They like to skip the letters. It's, well, yeah, whatever. And it's like, do that at your own peril. That's it. And we'll move into them next week.
Thank you.
Yes.
Now I can see why your book is the length it is.